Thank you and welcome.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. Hello and welcome to another installment of Rise's In Conversations With. For those of you that may be unfamiliar with the organization, Rise is a global nonprofit advocacy group that originally was started in the UK, but has newly expanded to the North American chapter. We're focused on gender diversity within the media and entertainment technology sector. And we really aim to be able to help ensure we've got a sustainable pipeline of diverse non-craft talent at all levels across the engineering, product innovation, technical operations, sales, marketing, editorial, and commercial worlds, all the places that you didn't know that you could work and be in the entertainment industry. My name is Katie Fellion. I am one of the North American board members. And before we dive in, I did want to remind everybody that we are still accepting mentorship applications for the North American Mentorship Program. The closing date for that is April 9th, but if you're interested, please head over to the Rise website, click on that mentorship tab and register. To just give you an idea about some of the basic time commitments, if you are interested in being a mentor, it's about an hour a month for 6 months for some, one-on, two-on-one sessions. We provide the mentor with the mentee application forms, a 2-hour training. There's some, mid-course check-ins with all the mentors as well. And then twice in that 6-month program, there's a coffee roulette session where we mix it up with the mentors and mentees. So it's a good opportunity to be exposed to a lot of different people within the industry in different jobs, and to get a sense of what everybody's doing. That said, we're also still seeking program sponsors as well, because we need to pay for the ability to be able to do all of this. So if anybody company-wise is interested, please let us know, and we're happy to send you some of that information. So anyway, housekeeping aside, I am very excited to be sitting here with one of the women that I find most fascinating and most inspiring, Kate Morrison-Lyons. She is Netflix's production workflow manager for the US and Canada. And give you a little background about her. Kate started as a camera trainee in the UK before transitioning into the camera facilities. She ended up in post-production technology, where she was dedicating her time to understanding the end-to-end workflows of file-based management for digitally captured feature films, and ended up in 2011 starting her own company, Fluent Image, that was really dedicated to helping handle that digital negative pipeline from capture through DI. You got to work with a bunch of really cool clients like 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Legendary, on all of those huge, wonderful films, the tentpoles that we all like to aspire to. Then later you were hired by the Walt Disney Company to support their live action movies. You relocated to the US and joined their production technology department. And then in 2018, hello, Netflix. So you now are managing the whole production workflow team for the creative technology. I think there's a focus more on the scripted long form, that feature world. But we have had plenty of conversations over the last few years. And I just have to say, you are one of the most interesting people because of that background, because of how you got here. And I'm personally curious, did you always dream of being in entertainment? How did you end up in this business?
I think it's kind of, I could go all the way back to the influences as a small human being, which I think was thoroughly, I grew up around cameras, film camera, like photography. My father was an avid photographer. My uncle worked at Kodak. But also tinkering with stuff, always like there was always something to build or fix or manage or deal with, in my world. And so I was always kind of around the creative ideas and thoughts, but also in the how does this work, breaking it down and like understanding it. So I think from that perspective, there was not a tiny piece of me that even contemplated being able to use anything that I naturally had to contribute to being in the film industry. Yeah. I was always a huge fan of films. I'm literally I have like this essence of Kevin Smith around me, which is like, I worked in a video shop and, video and
like the kind that you have the VHS.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And after, even when you can smoke inside, sorry, terrible, but it's 90s people, 90s. And made my own little movies. I basically, what happened is that I think I was like 17, 18. I got a ticket to America, to New York, because I have family out this side and East Coast. And it was one of those things where I was in New York and I was watching this movie, which is called Stealing Beauty by Bertolucci. And it was shot by Darius Khondji. And I was with people that were just like, if you love this so much, why don't you do it? And I was like, what do you mean do it? Like, this is not, I don't know anyone in the industry. I don't know it was so distanced from me. And they were like, just go to film school. And I was like, and I looked at film school and I was like, I'm sorry, $35,000 a year in a country that I don't live in. It just didn't compute to me. But luckily there were people around me who kind of knew different spaces that I could probably put my focus on. And I ended up going to art college and just working over and above the course I was doing. The course was very minimal. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but I ended up being a loader on graduate pieces. This is my Kevin Smith coming out, ran a film club. But like I was on a film club with SVHS, VHS, Laserdisc, and then DVD. I mean, it was like,
wow.
I remember watching Aliens and you couldn't make out anything because it was so dark. So it was like it was on VHS and I was like, I definitely shouldn't do this again. But and then I was able to, my script we all did a short film. We entered like a short film thing and I got to make my own film, and but photography was still my passion. And it was the composition side, and then the lighting piece was so fascinating to me. And I was like, I'd sort of at that point thrown myself into as much of sort of self-motivated, the only person that's going to do this is me, so therefore let's just keep pushing. And at that point I was like, right, I want to stay in the camera space, even though everyone was like, but you'd be a great producer. And I was like, thanks. But the technology and the creative space was way too interesting to me for me to back into the producing side. So that was the first piece, I think, the first inspiration and excitement for me, definitely.
Definitely. Well, and you ended up finding your way through that camera minefield, and starting a company focused on that too. What did you how did you come to that realization? Where did the company idea come from? And I'm curious to hear what that part of your trajectory, how that contributed.
I learned very early on that the image was the most important thing to me. And I, as a camera trainee, it was, I think there's a combination of me being really bad at the job and also just really not enjoying it.
Was it the on-set part? The hours?
I think it was like, make sure there's tapes in the bag and that you're pushing the trolley around and that you're in a van full of men who are just not, and just, it wasn't there for me, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but didn't make your heart sing.
So when I actually got to work on a more broader level at ARRI, that's where I went. I ended up at ARRI. I ended up kind of being a conduit for production and cinematographers in the camera department, and making sure that the choices they were making when they chose the right capture format, which at that time was film. I was literally at the point, I was at ARRI when they launched the ARRI cams, so the ST and the LTs, and we had the 435s, 535s, and we were doing quite a lot of indie films, a lot of like the early Guy Ritchie movies and all those kinds of things, which were very exciting. But it was a treasure to me. The film was a treasure, right? I'd spent many years in the 90s in a dark room with film, and being able to facilitate that onto these movies and support the camera teams were really important to me. And what happened was the D20 came out, which was the first digital film capture, kind of digital film camera to come from ARRI.
Yeah.
And
that was a huge. Do you want to explain a little bit more about the D20 for the people that don't know? Because that really was a huge change in terms of how we thought about what digital cameras could do.
It was built very much around the concept of the cinematographer, the film cinematographer. So it was like Ari's first like dip into this space where they were like, digital film is coming up, right? It's a thing. Because we had the Genesis, Panavision were scooting along with Sony. And so it was this really interesting combination of film mentality, because we were, at that point, we were all still utterly snobs about it. Like anyone who worked in, I mean, I would, this is the thing, I was saying like, who is this video department? I was the worst. And, but there was this proactive way of them being like, how can we help cinematographers kind of cozy into this new space without jarring it too much? So, they built, the viewfinders that were very similar to the film cameras, but the back end were all full of these boards and chips and stuff that produced, a signal that was then recorded onto HD Cam SR, right? So it was this weird kind of combination of video and film, and I don't know, it was a sort of strange, but you could hear it coming, like the digital film world was coming, you could hear it at that point. And the majority of the film camera department, the film team, the freelancers, they were like, this is nothing. It's a thing. It's a fad.
It's a fad. No, I remember that. I totally remember that the file-based capture and digital film, it's a fad. It's either going to be tapes and you've got your broadcast world, or the digital, or it's cinema cameras, it's film.
And there was this very big sort of it was the ivory tower effect, I think, in film, where it was just, everyone's like, this is untouchable, I'm the Wizard of Oz, everything's gonna be great. And the D20 finally got onto a show of mine, a film, because I was supporting film, and it was very strange. Like all the accessories, like the whole feel of the kit and the people on it and everything was the same, except for this video component, this weird tape-based component, right? And I remember visiting like the production teams who've been in the industry for years as UPMs and production supervisors, and there was this wall of HD Cam SR, and I was like, what is this? And they were like, we don't know. And I was like, I don't know, because you've spent at that point was, I'd been working with film and photography for many years, but also in motion picture for, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years at that point. And you knew how emulsion worked. I mean, I've always worked very hard to understand the core technical, nuances of the technology. And suddenly that was gone, and there was this completely new idea. And when I say that I love, like, the image was the most precious thing to me, I was suddenly horrified that people were making these beautiful movies on tape. I was like, I can't do this. And I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, I think the Red One was kicking its boots around over here.
Yeah, right around the same time. And and I think that's where, if you think about placing yourself in that time frame, for the last 50 years, everything related to filmmaking had been celluloid based, right? And within the course of almost, basically a decade, everything fast tracked to leaning into these file-based captures, to recording on tape and then recording to files, and the IT infrastructures and understanding of how digital cameras capture and translate those images. It yielded this entirely new world that heavily relied upon technology to make that creative.
Yeah, and it was horribly jarring. There was like there was a genuine, it sounds very dramatic, but there was a grieving process in the industry, because DPs were, it's like you have to relearn everything, but also it wasn't ready. That was the key thing. And I think that's the piece, that's when I decided that I couldn't be in this space anymore. I was like, the camera world is not changing quick enough. Everyone else is going to start overtaking, and nobody's paying attention. And that was the time where I was like, there's a fork in the road in my life where I was like, I can continue to just be controlled by the future of technology, or I can get ahead of this. And that's when I branched off into the world of, like, it was sort of post-production technology engineering stuff, right? Where I basically went and interviewed for a company. I actually interviewed as a sales rep for Codex in 2006.
Oh wow!
Okay. At that point, between me and you and everybody else, it looked like a washing machine. I was like,
oh, I remember.
I have no. And I read the brochure and I was like, I still don't get it. And I went to the interview and I was like, sure, I don't know. And basically what happened is that the company called me back, which was a company called SohoNet, and we're like, well, we just want to bring you in to work for us, because what we need to do is we have presence in the film studios, and we want someone who understands production to come in and help us,
That's a really interesting role I didn't know about the stopover at SohoNet, because that's really one of those areas, like you said, where it's the IT infrastructure and the technologies dipping into the production world.
And SohoNet themselves were pushing the edges of this technology too, because they had designed a wider area network with a methodology of a local area network. So they had this like guaranteed bandwidth that was global, that they had basically been developed in London and Soho in order to move giant files around because of the heavy post-production visual effects space in London.
Right.
And that's where it came from. And it came from multiple different companies coming together to say, we're being charged too much money for the telco, from the telecommunications space. We need to be able to move our files around better and more efficiently. And sort of from these concepts became SohoNet Media Network, which is something which so basically I went from chemistry to physics and was like, and had to, again, I had to start to teach myself again a new discipline. And that was the transition from camera into post, because the stuff that I was doing at SohoNet was learning all about how networks worked, selling networking technology to producers. That was joy. That was one of my favorite comments from a line producer was, why the something does hot air down a pipe cost me so much money? So that was in 2007, I think.
Yep. Okay.
So again, it was like, and I weirdly enough found networking fascinating, and there is no, I'm not a Cisco qualified, person type thing. I learned everything by finding great people and saying, how's this work, and being interested, and then trying to teach them the disciplines of production. And I think that was really key in that space, because if you want to work in an industry like the film industry, like that is a very creative, very competitive industry, you need to be reactive. And I think it's a very difficult balance. This as well, of all people, is you need to commit 1,000% into this, right? And this is why I had to explain to them. I was like, you can't be a 9-to-5 company and offer networking solutions to a film when you're literally growing this from the ground up.
Right.
Which now it's a no-brainer that every studio is built with good framework and good connectivity, whereas then it was an afterthought the whole time.
But again, think about it. That's only 12, 13 years ago. Just putting mile markers in some of these conversations, because I think it does put some context into how quickly things change. That's a change at the studio level, at the production approach. That's only happened within basically the last decade.
And I think if you can show the value of something like that and be able to explain it to people in a way that you don't make them feel stupid, and you make them feel like they're getting their money's worth, and it is genuinely something you believe in. And that's always been my I guess the foundation I've always worked with is like, am I passionate about it? Do I care? And the thing is that at SohoNet, what was lovely is that, you know, yes, I was doing all this networking stuff, but I also had this opportunity because they were a sister company with Codex at the time, and they were working on the Dolster cameras. They were doing Speed Racer. They would, like, everyone was involved in this new emergence of digital film capture and what that all meant. So I was able to spend half of my time on that, and then the other half doing the kind of business side of, you know, making sure that people didn't fire me because I was actually achieving. Because, you know, CEOs is like, are you doing what we've hired
you for? Yeah.
right? Instead of just doing the things that I wanted to do, which
but
like,
I think that curiosity is probably that one of the things that has served you the best as you have, you know, continued to evolve in your career and, you know, personally and professionally. It seems like that's where maybe, I mean, I'm stretching here, but it seems like that's maybe where the idea for forming your own company comes from as well. It's this desire, this curiosity, and you know, desire to build.
Yeah, and I think again, back to that passion for the image, it was also an opportunity to look at what was broken at that time, right? And one of the things that really would upset me was going to cinema and seeing something that was extremely expensive, extremely big, and very visual effectsy, and looked terrible. And I was like, I know right. I know the DP that shot this. They're not bad, right? So what's the disconnect? And then again, that's propelling me into this curiosity about how do we make this better? Because if you're removing the emulsion side of film and you're turning this into a file-based workflow, which at the time wasn't a thing. It was, everyone was on tape, but when you create files out of a camera, you're creating CG files in visual effects. There has to be a correlation there, and that was the ingredients, and that was the driving force behind Fluent, right? And the nice thing about what SohoNet gave me was the opportunity to build a division at SohoNet to start that, because at the time, we called it Vessel. That's classic. It was called Vessel, and what it was really a dedicated team, me and Ben and John. I was just watching and going, how does this work? And they were like, it's fine. It was great. They were also, you know, equally had great, curious people there. But at SohoNet, I met some incredibly intelligent people who understood the basic underlying foundations of these files, and were like, okay, let's do something. You know, the guys that built SohoNet were suddenly like, how do we make this happen? And how do we do this? And I was like, you have the brain, and I have the capacity to know where to put the brain. So we can probably do this, and we can do this really well. And I was flying by the seat of my pants. There is no denying that, you know. So
as many of us are.
Oh, especially then, that was pretty wild. And when we did a film called Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and as part of the SohoNet piece and Vessel. And I remember paying for my own ticket to get to Australia to prep the show, because luckily what had happened is that the studios knew SohoNet. They had faith in SohoNet because the Wide Area Network had, you know, delivered a movie in the past and saved their world, and they were willing to risk new stuff, because I think at that time in the industry, and, you know, I'd love your opinion on this one, but everyone was kind of interested in in the change that was happening. There wasn't anything specific, nothing had been fixed or concluded or was ready, but people knew stuff was changing. So I felt like people were a little bit less risk averse than they are today.
So, wow.
That's what happened.
Well, so fast forward then to, you know, to you've been handling, you know, projects and developing pipelines and helping, you know, meld that gap between filmmakers and the technology to be able to achieve that vision, you know, and then Disney sees you doing that and snaps you up and moves you to the US. Was there a culture shock? Was there a difference between, you know, and especially between running your own company and working under a larger conglomerate again, doing a lot of probably the same sort of connective tissue, but having different masters to, you know, to report to?
I think the biggest difference was, and this is the advice that I give to especially people who've hit a point in their lives that I did when I started Fluent, which was, I can make this better and I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to throw myself off a proverbial skyscraper of life. Go and do it small and dynamically, and because when you get to the big companies and the big spaces, your impact is really going to be about making those big companies better. It's not about you, and it's not about your vision, like independent vision. So I think when by the time Disney got in touch, I had run like at least 6 giant silly movies end to end, and I was like, I feel like the industry is in a better place, which sounds so like, it just doesn't mean to sound arrogant or anything, like it's like one giant impact. It was like, I don't feel I am getting enough out of this anymore. I feel like I have done the flying by the seat of my pants to now I'm running a company, and that's not my jam. That's not what I want to do. Yeah. So is this can I give the company over to my partner and for them to be, able to run it independently? Can I make this move? Because then my passion was sort of, how can I help the filmmakers? Because I think what happened when digital film capture really developed itself is that the complexity, the options just expanded. We suddenly had a multitude.
Well, and the learning curve as well, because of that multitude, right? You learn one thing that has served you well for 10 years, and to your point, that between the cinematographers and the producers and everybody else, you're relearning how to work.
Yes, 100%. And I think what's so interesting is, there was this one workflow in a can that was consistent in film, right? You might change, a little bit here, a little bit there, depending on what type you want to go with, but ultimately the process is there. And suddenly we had, 4 or 5 big camera manufacturers who were quite capable of making something that worked. And the form factor was really important, because suddenly these cameras were capable of being attached to bonnets of cars, or they were attached to humans, and everyone wanted to kind of get that feel of that look, and that, suddenly something, a film like French Connection that was made decades ago is suddenly so easy to replicate with a GoPro, and, it's different. It's so interesting how the form factor of digital cameras have sort of made filmmaking slightly more like it's hard to do something wildly different in the movement, if that makes sense. But you, as somebody developing the imaging pipeline, and suddenly you get, in the early days when you're thrown multiple different camera formats because, the director and DP thought it was fun.
Right. You're like, somebody had an iPhone in their pocket.
Oh, I mean, it's the worst. I mean, years of having to deal with like phantom footage that's had its time code removed and no mezzanine files created, and you're like, okay, we'll just start from scratch, shall we? But ultimately, again, with that goal of maintaining that creative thought and creative ideas, and making sure that, here we are, we have this camera that's capable of these beautiful images, so let's make sure they are beautiful, and supporting that and being part of that. And at the studio, when I moved to the studio, I felt kind of empowered to represent that kind of creative intent on a technical level, where I was like, if you want to achieve this, then this is what you should be doing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's all those options, like, should we shoot compressed? Should we shoot raw? How do we frame this? How do we, because I was, really privileged in my career of being able to see everything from camera all the way through, from, camera to editorial to visual effects to the finishing. I know how difficult it is to manage these files, so those choices, that pre-production space is really, really beneficial if it's used to its utmost capacity. And those are the key pieces that I sort of was allowed to work with when I moved over to Disney.
Yeah, well, I think I had used this term with somebody, but it's you essentially become an image sommelier, right? You have your creatives, your filmmakers that are relying upon you and your expertise and your ability to be able to help define taste, or to to define what different choices may mean. But
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's more of a supportive role versus a deciding role.
Yeah, very much so. And to be a voice to people that don't understand at the studio level. And that's not to say that people, that studio executives don't know what they're talking about. It's just that there is, as you say, the change in technology in the last 20 years has been exponential and wild. And everyone is willing to learn. So that's something that I think is really my responsibility, and the responsibility of my teams, is to educate, to help people make much more educated choices in what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So speaking of education, and especially the role that you're in with Netflix now, where do you feel like you're making the most impact there? What are the places that you feel that you've been able to help bring that educational role, or or development role, or places where you've, knowing where you came from and where we're at now, what are you proud of?
Oh,
Picture. This is like an acceptance speech.
I know. Well, I'm not entirely sure I can answer the proud bit yet, because I just feel like I'm still in the washing machine of my life and work. But I think what Netflix brings to me is it's a challenge I've never experienced. It is so huge. It is amazingly nourishing in that respect. I get to now work. So from the early days in the camera space, where I would support teeny tiny movies and indies and all those things, all the way through to, big giant movies, suddenly Netflix has appeared and they're like, well, here's some nonfiction, multicam and indies and episodic and film, and there's 675,000 million of them. And I'm like, okay, so how do I translate or just pull from this brain out of everything I've learned, so that my team who are there to sit with the title managers and the productions are equally as able as I am to support them. And I think the most important thing for me is to make sure that my team has a multitude, just are better than I am. You know what I mean? I surround myself with people who are brilliant.
Yeah.
And any of them, and it's a huge challenge for me to keep on top of maintaining their brilliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so far, so good. I hope.
Good so far. Well, how does, I mean, I guess put yourself in the shoes of somebody that would be wanting to move into this space. How would you suggest that they do that? Knowing the trajectory that you've had, where you've had an opportunity to literally, put your feet into the industry and have a change in helping it navigate to where it's at now. If somebody else that had that same creative spark, a desire to be at that nexus of creative and photography with the technology, where does somebody start?
Well, I think the most valuable life experiences are often the most uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Just saying that. I think
growth opportunities.
It's the most annoying thing to say, because it's like,
I know.
I wasn't something that I was ever privy to, or anybody no one pat me on the head and said, don't worry, love, it's gonna, this is all good learning experience, that didn't happen to me at all. I just thought I was in perpetual hell for at least 10 years, and then woke up and was like, oh, that was a really good idea. But I think what's really important is talk to people, find people in the industry that have done it, or do something that's interesting and talk to them, because I think availability for that conversation, for me especially, is really important. And I think, Netflix is really good at that as well. But just for some guidance as to where to throw your time and energy. And I think the most beneficial stuff is to have that production experience, go into a department and just throw yourself in there as a PA for a while, or an assist, or you know, see what it feels like in order, because for me, I do so much of what I do is the resource for production and the resource for title management, and that knowledge of what is really hard and how to help that. You only learn it by doing. And, you know, I think if you can sort of isolate, like try and isolate sort of the areas in which that you're interested in, don't hesitate in reaching out and throwing like messages at people, or just, it doesn't matter anymore. Just throw yourself into it, throw yourself at people, annoy people, and work really hard. There's no other way of doing it. You have to work really, really hard. And that's just,
no, that's a takeaway. I think that many leaders and many people that have worked to be in these positions of influence, that's a takeaway that everybody has. It is.
With me, sorry. I had everything else paused and then spam alert. Excellent.
It happens. It happens. Well, I mean, I guess maybe this is a good time too to pivot to one of the conversations that you and I keep having all the time, because it's that finding finding mentorship, finding roles, other women, especially in these whether it's on-set imaging or camera or post-production technologies. It seems like we're far and few between, and that's part of the reason for Rise as an organization, right? Is to help develop those talent opportunities. But where do you think that's those challenges are coming from? Where is that? And I should say, I feel like it's definitely changed a lot over the last few years. But you grab a bunch of people on. Grab a picture of the camera department, and the number of women that you're going to find is yeah.
And I think it's very important to recognize that the industry has had 100 years of men in it, and not a bad thing at all. It's just it is what it is, and I think. I think it's going to take time, and it's going to take more interest from women to want to have to do the extra work to be part of teams that are a majority men. I think it's very, and I think it's interesting because we talk about it is changing, but I think talking about how it's changing is very important, because I think it's changing because there's more awareness. I'm not entirely sure there is enough commitment from the teams in which women want to be part of is enough, right? Right. At the moment, I think there needs to be more space given to the behavior of women, for example. Like, we are fundamentally extremely different to men, right? And this is something that I'm always challenged with, but luckily, being nice and old, I'm quite open to having these very blunt conversations with my male colleagues, and especially
as you get older, you stop trying to please quite as much, right? There's a little more gravitas that you can lend, and you feel like, I mean, we've talked about this idea of imposter syndrome, right? And I think that plagues a lot of women, especially in the some of these roles where you're maybe the only woman in the room.
And I think imposter syndrome almost downplays it, because everyone has imposter syndrome. I think it's different because the way in which apologies for making massive general sweeping statements here about women.
It's a conversation, yeah.
But I do have to point out to my leaders sometimes that I work differently. Like, I don't go immediately for a very analytical fixing methodology. I actually go for a more kind of like, I'm just getting a feel for something. And no, you're not going to get a result from me or a response from me for about 2 or 3 weeks. Like, your response might be in 10 days and it might be a written, analogy of what you're doing. But actually what I need to do is understand the situation and get much more of a feel for where I want to take this, and I think it's not just, I think if we remove the male and female piece of this and just recognize individuals as working differently, that would make things a lot easier, for sure, you know. But, you know, then there's the other story, which again, we talk about changing, but, you know, to really dig into the meat of this, I would love women who have to be on set all day to be really happy to ask for a toilet right next to location if they're in the camera department. Do you know what I mean? It's like, there are certain things where I think we can't say that we need things because actually it's regarded as difficult.
Right.
Because we're asking for more.
Right.
And it's like, well, actually we do need more. Why is that a problem?
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's part of this change that everybody is struggling with too, as you know, reaching a more of a gender equality, but asking for more, just being as part of reaching that equality. And it's not wrong, and it's not, you know, it shouldn't be taken as a reason for why not. It's just part of the conversation.
Yeah, you know, and it's, you know, spending enough time in the camera space to know that, you know, and having these frank conversations like at Camera Marge or something with other women in the camera departments, just talking about how you have to defeminize yourself. You need to remove the female a little bit just to make it slightly easier, and it's not just because of the men, it's just because people are not used to seeing these different people in these spaces. And, you know, there are, you know, and I think it's really important that it's not shut down or people are shouted at or just told that they're being terrible because their biases kick in. It's like, we all have biases. It's just a question of whether or not you want to proactively recognize them or ask for help and say, I don't understand. What are you asking for? You know, why are you asking me to accept, you know, to bring on a trainee in the grip department who's a woman when she can't lift, you know, half a dolly? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it, but don't you have someone else from like the lighting department that can help you? Do you know what I mean? Just start sort of thinking differently, as opposed to, you know, either making it too much of a big deal or completely undervaluing because you are so used to one way of working.
Right. You know, and the accommodations. I think the other big challenge, especially for women moving into some of these, you know, different production environments, and even like, you know, for IT and for post, there's the childcare aspect, which is a huge struggle. You know, and being able to be able to share those roles, to have, you know, to have a maternity leave, to not have that affect your ability to get a job, to keep a job. You know, those are absolutely areas too that we are struggling with, just as a society, as a culture.
Definitely, it's a recalibration.
Yeah,
it's a recalibration because, you know, instead of, again, we have the luxury to think slightly differently. We can do that because we are more self-aware than I think we've ever been as a society. And so we can recognize that, you know, a woman has spent a lot of time with their children. I'm like, it's probably the best thing for those kids and for the mother. Now they're coming back into the workspace, or vice versa, whatever it is. Let's not judge them on the gap. Let's, you know, if they're valuable, let's put some work into bringing them back up to speed and recognizing that maybe it's only a 6-hour day. Because, you know, let's look after each other in that space, because you'll get a lot more out of people.
Well, and I think that with COVID and work from home and, you know, pandemics and just changing the way that all of us interact and connect with one another and think about work and a work-life balance, we are primed to be able to have those conversations more so now than we could a year ago or 2 years ago, right? Yeah. Which actually, since I think we're getting close to the end, but there was a question that actually came up that's related to this. If I can read this out for the group. From John Harris, I loved your memory when at SohoNet you spoke to a director about technology and he stated, why should I pay anything for what is hot air down a pipe? I think COVID has definitely allowed us to bring new technology into production, but how do you feel productions are open to looking and reviewing technology to improve and save money on their workflows? Or will we have simply taken one big step and now we're all going to go back to, well, this works, why change it?
Good question.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think progress is very interesting regionally, and I think this is what was been, again, a luxury for me, because I've come from a different industry. I cut my teeth in the UK, and then I worked for giant big studios here, and then so I have a vague idea of different sorts of takes on the different, like, big studio films to the less indie films. But also, thanks to the job that I have now, I see a lot of work being done in APAC and different countries in EMEA and LATAM, and there's so much low-hanging fruit in those areas for technology, that it's a really wonderful space for a lot of people to just spin up and run around and just have a great time. But what's wonderful is to sit and reflect on what we do here in UCAN and what we do here in Hollywood, and how much of a lead blanket we're under because of the legacy we have. And I think because we are old and we've been doing this a really long time, we're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Change is hard. And I think it is incredibly important to keep energy behind change and keep pushing and keep testing and keep, those edges should be pushed on a regular basis, and we can do it. And I think what's wonderful about Netflix is that their complete dedication to their members. It's like, well, their members are happy when they have something wildly interesting to watch that looks great. So therefore, my job is to make sure that the filmmakers are really happy with those choices they're making, that allow what they are thinking and what their creative thoughts are get to be reflected to those members. And there's so much space to work in to make that better, which is very exciting. It's just, it's heavy lifting. For sure.
Where do you think the biggest opportunities lie? Especially with making things better. Where are the places that we can focus?
So I don't know, it's very interesting, because we've got this kind of disconnect with the display technology for me, right? So consumers have just this array of this multitude of displays they can look at content on now. It was so wonderfully simple-ish when it's like, you're looking at DCPs, you're looking at projected stuff, you're in a theater, and you're like, I know this is fine. And then when you get your DVD, it doesn't really matter, it's an afterthought. Whereas now it's like, okay, how do we align with these manufacturers to make sure that the consumer's getting what they want, or what's really good, and what's, what is good, As far as filmmakers, it's trying to make them feel warm and fuzzy in that environment. And I think that's what COVID has done, right? Because everyone was just suddenly, you couldn't go in. There's way more than I do from firsthand experience. You've had to help filmmakers get comfortable watching their material on displays and in situations that are just not.
Right. Yeah, you make do. That's been the COVID subtitle. We just make do.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's hard because you want filmmakers to feel like they are making their movie, and it's their, because filmmaking is it is a really vulnerable thing to do, and you need people around you that will, I guess, agree with you, or just help you on that journey to make your work what it is that you really want it to be. And I think when you don't have that projected, incredible color bay to be like, yay, this is what everyone's, as a director, you get to see that for yourself.
But I think there's also, and to your point about controlling displays, there are so many times when you get a photo from somebody and of the environment that they're in, and there's windows everywhere, and there's light streaming in, and there's an awareness of the environment that creatives, that's not something that they come to the table with, because it's never been something that's been asked of them before. It's true on the sound side, right? With sound, it's the same sort of thing. You're listening, you're reviewing a mix on some headphones, and you've got a train rolling outside, or the TV playing in the background. It's going to impact that experience, and we're all struggling with how do we formalize it, and how do we standardize it, and how do we give everybody that same experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sound's a really good example of that. And that sound is still moving and changing, and you know, it's we have opportunity there to make it better, because we know what better is, because we actually, you know, we know what we want to hear, you know, in the same way we know what we want to see. And you know, I'm a complete snob when it comes to imaging, obviously.
Hey, you know, you staked your career in it.
Yeah, exactly. So there is this, you know, I know that I have a good setup, but it's, you know, it's like when I remember when I did my first film at Fluent, and we managed the image pipeline end to end, and you know, I didn't sleep for like 5 years, but this was only 18 months in, and going to the theatre to watch it, and I was so like, not angry, just like, why are these, you know, these theatres not putting enough energy into making this look good?
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny because that really irritated me then, and I look at the challenges that we have with the streaming stuff today, and I'm like, there are fights that you can you know, pick your battle ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
But there really is, you know, I think one of the really important battles to make filmmakers feel more comfortable is definitely working with the HDR space at the beginning, and being able to give them an experience to say, this is what you're, you know, and I'm not talking just cinematographers, I'm talking hair, makeup, costume. Yeah, I mean, this is the time where you went from SD to HD, where, you know, you've got Mac recreating foundations specifically for that additional resolution. And I feel like HDR needs to be explored a lot earlier on, so that filmmakers can decide, okay, we're going to have to strategize earlier to get this to look good.
Right. You know, we have a film we're servicing right now that is, it's the first that's doing HDR dailies and HDR editorial. And it has been, it's very similar to what you've described with these, as the pipelines, the technology is changing. You're constantly pushing the edges of what's possible, and that's the exciting part, I think, for a lot of people, that there's a lot of opportunity for new ideas, for new jobs, new companies, you know, to be able to enter the space. But we continue to be at the precipice of new things.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that experience and that work that you're talking about needs to be done over and over again until we found out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's no catch-all. And so, you know, I think, you know, when I talk about heavy lifting and the lead blanket here, it's because, you know, people just want something either done or not done, or a certain way, or, you know, it's like people objecting to the concept of snowflake workflows. And I'm just like, the beauty of digital film capture is that it can be anything you want it to be. And that's what we should be encouraging and supporting.
Right.
And this is what, you know, this is what's really important. And you have to have informed people who are the best at what they do to tell you what the best tool is for that job. Yeah. And that's my drive now, is to maintain that.
Yeah. Well, Serena just pinged us. We're at a 5-minute warning, so I guess we can open it up for any other questions, if anybody has any. And otherwise, we're just going to continue chatting.
Fine, perfectly fine.
No questions. I guess we got them all. I guess we were very thorough.
Did it? Yeah. Yes, exactly. Covered everything.
Yeah. Well, yes. All right. Well, I have one other question, because you had framed it to me earlier, and I love it, and I think it's probably worth another, you know, hour-long discussion. But as a woman in leadership, as someone that has influence and has the capacity to be able to continue to provide mentorship, to build upon those opportunities, you know, you've talked to me quite a bit about the being grateful that you are standing on the shoulders of others in order to be in the position that you are in, and how do we do that as women in leadership? How do we make room in order to invite more people in and to be able to continue to lift people up? Like I said, that's a loaded question.
I know. We have 4 minutes.
3 minutes left. Right.
Got this. I don't have it at all. It's making room for me means be celebrating wildly efficient, intelligent, achieving women, not being threatened by them, not being horrified that I'm incapable or not as good as them, and making sure that the ones that are out there are being recognized because of the privileged position that I am in, and I can see it. That's all, that's the space. And thank the women that have come before me in every space, and just, and really be grateful for the, for the men around me who are
Smart people
and super cool. And, I can say anything to and point out their biases and push them to push mine. You know what I mean? It's just constant.
Yeah.
And, I do think it is about lifting up, and being able to see the because this is the experience that I think after 20 years, you have the experience to see a trajectory. And if you see, great, incredible, achieving women who are confused about where they want to go next, or what brave looks like, or courage, to help them with that, and just be like, you're good, you're gonna be fine, you're years, make mistakes. It's what builds it. It's what,
Yeah.
I have had at least 2 or 3 moments in my career where I'm like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And then it's been okay. It happens.
Yeah. Failure makes you better.
Yes. Or what is failure? Like, it's, there's blatant obvious failure. When things fail, you literally lost something. It's very important. We won't get into that, another hour conversation. Or there's like what you consider failure. What have you done for yourself? And yeah, it's work. Again, it's a different kind of work, but it's awareness work and it's empathy work. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think unfortunately we're out of time, but that's a great place to leave it. Is, we got to do the work. We got to keep doing the work and keep celebrating the people around us that are exceptional of every gender.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for this awesome conversation. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'm sure we'll have another hour long at some point. Probably not broadcast over Zoom, but yeah.
That'd be nice.
Cool. All right. Well, that wraps us up. Thanks everybody for participating and listening. And if there's any questions, definitely feel free to hit up the Rise organization. We need mentors, we need sponsors. So hopefully we'll get a few more. So thanks everybody.
Great. Thanks.